of 2010, the day the 33 miners in Chile were rescued. Before I start, I would like you to leave your opinion about this accident below. Do you remember where you were when all this happened? I want to read your anecdotes below, and I also invite you to leave suggestions for possible future videos. I also invite you to leave a like, subscribe, and activate notifications if you haven't done so yet. Now let's begin. 69 days had already passed underground. There was anxiety among the 33 mine workers who were in the final stretch after an immense struggle. They were just minutes away from seeing their relatives again, from breathing the fresh air they had longed for more than 2 months. Among the shadows cast by the lanterns, they looked at each other and had to choose who would be the first to return to the surface. The choice, moreover, was thought out and evaluated by the rescue team. Florencio Abalos was the one in the best physical condition, as well as being the most skilled. Florencio was one of the youngest miners and had earned the nickname of the cameraman. Thanks to his recordings, the families received greetings from the miners. The vast majority of the videos from inside the mine were captured by him. When the rescue capsule went down, they opened the door, checked the safety belts, and began the ascent. The rescue was a fact. From the outside they were waiting for them with endless preparations, but above all, eager to see them in person again. The pulley of the machine turned and pulled the capsule until it managed to bring up the first survivor. Seeing him, the applause, the whistles, and the screams stunned him. Everyone was happy, but there were still 32 men to bring up, 32 other incredible stories. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's start from the beginning. To better understand this story, it is necessary to talk about the mine, as it was the environment where they worked, where they survived, and where the entire rescue took place. The mine is in Cerro San Jose in Chile. About 30 miles away is the commune called Caldera in Copiapó, Atacama. This mine had been worked since the 80s by the company Esteban Forma Incorporated. From there, in its early years of activity, they extracted silver, then moved on to gold and continued with copper. A miner's salary is high, but that job is not for everyone. They must not be afraid of enclosed spaces or darkness, and much less of dust and dirt. It is considered an unhealthy job due to the extreme and dangerous conditions. And as you will see next, the danger of the mine is directly related to the collapses. However, many reports fail to clarify a very interesting fact. The San Jose mine is located on a geological fault. For those who don't know, a fault is a discontinuity that forms from the fracture of the Earth's surface rocks, similar to a crack, but it can reach up to about 200 kilometers deep. In that area of rupture, rock slides occur, and in that place the San Antonio and San Jose mines are located. So they sent the miners to a dangerous area? The answer is yes. But both the authorities and the miners and the owners of the deposit knew it from the beginning. That's why, due to the conditions in which these miners worked, they were known as the kamikazes. Some time ago, there had already been 2 major accidents at that place. One was in March of 2004 when Pedro González died after a loader filled with material extracted from the mine fell on him. Years later, in January of 2007, Manuel Villagran was walking down the main ramp of the San Jose deposit, when hundreds of kilos of rocks came loose and caused his death on the spot. This latest accident mobilized the Unionists, who managed to get the mine closed, but only for a while. By May 30th of 2008, it was back in operation, thanks to the National Geology and Mining Service. The safety reviews and tests had come back positive. The union managed to strengthen the production areas, increase control, and supervise the mine to prevent collapses or, in the worst case, avoid more deaths. During those years, they also managed to have a 50 square meter shelter built, reinforced with compressed air, a first aid kit, oxygen tubes, intercoms with the surface, food, and drinking water. Alongside safety, they had also achieved improvements in wages. The company paid 20% more than other mines, but money couldn't buy everything. The miners worked what would be a 7x7. They did 12-hour shifts for 7 days and rested for another 7. Some did overtime in their free time, and others returned to their regions. As I told you before, the miners' work is always on the edge of accidents, and this was seen again on July 3rd of 2010 when Gino Cortez lost one of his legs due to a new landslide. The incident did not have much significance until a month later, 33 miners were buried alive. On Thursday, August 5th, 2010, the miners were working in the San Jose mine. The morning was spent amidst dust and clanging metal. At 14:51, a rumble was heard that seemed like a detonation. The surprise was when they discovered that there was no scheduled explosion. What was happening was that the mine was collapsing, with them inside. San Esteban Primera, the company in charge of the San Jose mine, took about 5 hours to report the collapse. Despite the delay, 8 hours later, the rescue of the workers began. Until that moment, they thought that 34 men had been trapped, but one from the list had fallen asleep, so he didn't enter the mine. Upon hearing the news, the miners' families moved to the deposit and settled around the area. That place of waiting, anxiety, and faith was called Camp Hope. In a few hours, the rescue operation amounted to about 130 people. The National Office of Emergencies of the Ministry of Interior was in charge of confirming the identities of the miners who were underground. Later on, I'm going to tell you one by one who these miners were and what their stories were, because some are very interesting, and during the first 48 hours, the miners tried to get out through one of the safety ladders that was located in the ventilation of the shelter. Just to give you an idea of the distance, they were almost 700 meters below the surface. Of the 33 miners, 2 were sent to explore that exit, but they only reached 235 meters deep. When they began to ascend, they found that the emergency ladder had not been finished and they had to go back. They met with the group and informed them that they were buried, with no chance of getting out. The faces gradually faded as they couldn't do much on their own. They needed the help of someone else, and the 33 knew they had to be found first. And when they thought nothing could be worse than this, the mine began to shake. Chile was shocked and mobilized for the life of the 33 miners. Little by little, the news was gaining notoriety abroad, and during the first days the world talked about the rescue in the San Jose mine. The anguish and confusion hung in the air. A second collapse further complicated things. With the new movement of the stones, the ventilation chimney ended up being blocked, which they had tried to leave before. A rock of about 700,000 tons moved under the ground, blocking any possible exit. During the rescue, there was desperation, fear, and tears. But as often happens, the voices of pessimism filled the television programs, and phrases such as "the chances of finding the miners alive are slim" seemed to paint all possibility in black. The worst news was when the Chilean government decided to cancel the rescue, extinguishing any possible hope of finding the men. It's worth clarifying that until that moment, they didn't know that the 33 miners were still alive. The relatives erupted in anger when they heard about the cancellation. When they managed to calm down, they sought their own rescue operation. At that moment, the engineer Andreso entered the scene. In a post-rescue interview, Garrett said he had extensive mining experience but was unfamiliar with the location. "I had never heard of the San Jose mine. I went there on my own to see if I could help in any way. When I arrived, I noticed that everything was a chaos, that nobody really understood how to work. I lacked important information, such as details about the mine and the area's geology. Nobody knew how to give it to me, but I assembled teams and got to work. I had always felt in debt for not having done things for others, so for me it was a gift, an opportunity to do something for others." Sal Garrett proposed a rescue alternative. According to his calculations, there was the possibility of drilling a deep well in parallel using mining exploration machinery to try to contact the men. The engineer was a meticulous, rational, and demanding man, but with a unique sensitivity. After several calls and meetings with the Chilean government the day after his arrival, a new excavating machinery took the lead in the rescue. The device was so large that it had to be transported in several trucks. By August 9th of 2010, the drilling was already underway and progressing well. Through the new tunnel, they were going to install probes to bring in what was necessary to save the miners, oxygen, food, and water in the first instance. In addition, once contacted, they would be able to communicate and coordinate the rescue in both ways. It took several days of work. The rescuers were working in rotating shifts. The machinery only rested to lower its temperature. A key moment was when they reached 510 meters deep. They thought they had found the shelter that had been built before, but it was actually an abandoned workshop. The happiness was short-lived, but they kept looking for it. At times, August seemed to pass faster than expected. The miners' families felt helpless for not being able to help in the excavation. The hope of their relatives and rescuers was fading due to the failures of the probes. On Thursday, August 19th, 2010, 2 weeks had passed since the accident. One of the 6 probes that had been lowered was sending error signals, so they couldn't find the miners alive. The engineer and his team implemented more precise machinery. And on Sunday, August 22nd, 2010, they managed to make contact with the miners. They were 20 meters from the shelter, and to the surprise of many, after 17 days underground, they were all alive. Although they had managed to ration the little food available in the shelter, they showed clear signs of malnutrition. Hours later, they were able to communicate with them. Upon returning the probe to the surface, they found the message on a sheet of paper, written with a red pencil, that said, "We are well in the shelter, all 33 of us." That phrase became a survival motto from that moment on. President Piñera was one of those responsible for elevating the phrase alongside his position and his office. The news cheered the families, the rescue team, and spread throughout the country. The surprise of finding them alive was such that people went out to celebrate in the streets. Upon making contact with the workers, the first thing they wanted to know was about their health. A questionnaire was sent down the probe for them to answer and report on how they were. Most were stressed and anxious. When the rescuers reached them, they first asked, "How did you survive for so long?" The response was that they divided the food and ate every 48 hours. Each miner ate 2 spoonfuls of tuna, half a glass of milk, half a cookie, and they shared a can of preserved peaches. The rations were minimal, but it was the best way to wait for help, and they had not been mistaken. Not a minor fact, the place where they were recorded a temperature of 35 degrees Celsius. The next step for their rescue was to fortify and enlarge the conduit, but at the same time, the bad news came to light. Alejandro Bon, one of the mine owners, announced in the middle of the rescue that the company did not guarantee the payment of the miners' wages, not even the accident insurance. Do you remember that I had told you about the 2 fatal accidents in the mine before? Well, due to the union and their search for better conditions, they had to close for several months. About that time of inactivity, he said the following: "We had a significant economic deterioration, and to date we have not been able to recover, but the coverage of insurance in these cases is quite low." Bond used the collapse as an excuse to lay off about 300 workers from his company. On Tuesday, August 24, 2010, Naval Task Group 33 joined the team of brigades. The Navy's underwater specialists trained the personnel who remained active from the first moment in operational medicine. 2 days later was a unique day. Using a video camera they used for inspection, they established contact with the miners. There they managed to capture the first images of the workers. Abalos, nicknamed the cameraman, showed the place where they had survived so many days and focused on his colleagues one by one. That was the first time the families had contact with them. There were greetings, applause, crying, and a noticeable display of the fatigue they were experiencing down there. The video of the miners singing the Chilean anthem circulated on television and moved the world. On the surface, there was one of the doctors who stood out from the rest, first for his intensity in taking care of the miners, but on the other hand, because he was the only one wearing a helmet written with the phrase "No one stays down." Romagnoli was in charge of communicating with them. In addition, they prepared iPods with music for them. They recorded videos for them to do physical exercises, so they could lose weight and fit in the rescue capsule, a subtle but necessary detail to be able to get out of the mine alive. The patron saint of miners is San Lorenzo, and in his honor they carried out Operation San Lorenzo. With Andres Ugarret at the helm, a team of engineers and rescue specialists took care of the multiple soundings, which would be the first step of the definitive rescue. Topographic studies were the order of the day, and thanks to them they selected the best section of soil to continue with the plan. They used a machine, large drilling machine called Race Border or Strata 950. With it, they had to make a vertical tunnel. Then they had to dig horizontally with a smaller machine called Jumbo. When the plan was presented, a question began to sound in different places. How long were they going to take to carry out this entire rescue? And the answer was devastating, between 3 and 4 months. The aforementioned excavation, according to mathematical calculations, had an average speed of 20 meters per day, not counting possible technical problems. The Strata 950 began drilling the ground, leaving a hole 33 centimeters wide. After their work, they had to double it in size, in order to extract a person through the rescue capsule that would be pulled from the surface as if it were an elevator. Those capsules were called Phoenix and had been designed by the engineer Alejandro Poblete Villablanca. These metal structures could move within a duct easily thanks to the small wheels they contained on their sides. Inside they were equipped with oxygen, microphone, speakers, harnessed to hold the rescued person and other supports to be able to reach the surface without any problem. But what happened if that plan didn't go well? What happened if they encountered hard rock in those 700 meters? The engineers had a plan B as if it were a futuristic movie. The rescue machinery T-130, called by the mine people the Transformer, could become the job that would complicate the little Strata 950. The T-130 arrived at the mine on September 3rd and started its operations as quickly as possible to work alongside the other. The Plan A and Plan B worked together, speeding up the rescue time. As they say, there are no two without three. Then a Plan C emerged with heavier machinery, more specifically for drilling oil wells. The good thing was that it made holes of 70 centimeters in diameter with a single pass. Being so large, they didn't wait for there to be a problem with the drilling and preferred to be cautious. On September 19th, 2010, they brought it to the mine. They had to build a special concrete base to support such weight. When they managed to position it, they gave the order for it to also start drilling. By the 30th of September of that year, the relatives of the buried miners sued the company for $12 million. Later, the miners' own lawsuit would be added, but that's another story I'll tell later. At the same time, they assisted the miners and provided them with rescue gear, special helmets, and high-grade filter glasses to prevent damage from sudden lighting when they reached the surface. The final stretch of the drilling came with the start of a new month. October was set to bring reunion, fresh air, and freedom. Finally, on the morning of Saturday, October 9th, the Transformer, the drilling machine of Plan B, managed to reach the mine workshop. The relatives were overwhelmed with emotion. The following hours were dedicated to strengthening the conduit through which the miners would exit. Once that conduit was made, they had to strengthen it more. While the rescuers and engineers worked non-stop, the media began to crowd in to get the best shot of the exit. And that's how our story comes back to the beginning. After 69 days, on Wednesday, October the 13th, the rescue team led by Manuel Gonzalez began the descent to meet them. On the surface, there were about 3,500 people who were following the rescue operation. The media, moreover, broadcasted the event to more than 1 billion viewers. The miners began to come out one by one. First those who were in better condition, then the weakest, and later the psychologically strongest. The average rescue time for each miner was 40 minutes. In total, from the first to the last, it took 25 hours and 12 minutes. I'm going to tell you the order of departure next, but along with several details. Don't miss the following information, because among so many stories, there were countless issues. The first to leave was Florencio Abalos. At the time of the rescue, he was 31 years old. His shyness to appear in the recordings led him to be the cameraman. His skill and youth brought him to the surface first. He was the first face of the tragedy that traveled the world. He was followed by Mario Sepulveda. He was 40 with 2 kids. They called him the Battler. In other jobs, he had been a union representative. His wife said he went to work at the mine, which he never trusted. In the first video, when the camera focused on this sign that names the shelter, he took the opportunity to criticize the company. This is the famous shelter. This is where we were supposed to have conditions to stay, but the moment this happened, our power was cut off, our electricity line was cut off, and now it's being used for sleeping. The third to come out was Juan Ilanes. He was a 52-year-old electromechanic. He was a soldier on the border during the times of the Chilean-Argentinian crisis in the late 70s. According to his relatives, that strengthened his character. In the mine's depths, one of his first complaints was the lack of a private bathroom and shower. Carlos Mamani was the fourth. He was 24 with a year-and-a-half-old daughter on the surface. Originally from Bolivia, he hoped that his country's government would do something for him, but this did not happen. He was the only immigrant in the group and one of the few with a complete secondary education. Jimmy Sanchez followed him. At just 19, his 3-month-old daughter awaited him on the surface. Jimmy was afraid of the collapses but wanted to work until September, look for another safer job so he could continue studying. The sixth was Osman Araya. He had only been working in the mine for 4 months. A week before the collapse, he had argued with the manager. He told him that he was not willing to risk his life. Apparently, fate had another plan for him. Jose Ojeda was the 7th to emerge. He was 47 years old, 27 of which he had spent working in the mines. He operated heavy machinery. He was the one who wrote "We Are Well in the Shelter," the 33. The rescue continued with Claudio Llanes Lagos. Claudio was 34 years old and had a wife who asked him to stop working in the mine. His response was to ask questions. And where am I going to find such a secure job? On the day of the accident, he told his wife that he was very tired and sleep deprived. She told him to come back, but he said that because of the pay, he couldn't afford to miss a day of work. If they missed work, they would lose an approximate of 55 euros per day. The 9th was Mario Gomez. At 63, he had 4 children and 7 grandchildren. Inside the mine, he worked as a driver. Grandpa Mario, as they called him, was going to retire early, but he wanted to enjoy the new truck they had assigned him. That's why he went to work that day. Since he was 12 years old, he worked as a miner, and since that time, accidents were not lacking in his career. According to his wife, a month before the collapse, he asked his boss why they didn't look for an escape route, because any day they were going to get trapped in the mine. My husband had an idea of where they could make a faster route, and the boss told him to make a little drawing, but in the end, everything came to nothing. The 10th was Alex Vega. He was a mechanic and always had a smile on his face. Every time he left the mine, he would call his mother to talk a little. But that day when she didn't hear the call, she got worried and was one of the first to know that something was not right. Jorge Galleguillo came out next. He was a 56-year-old driller. Jorge had a lot of experience. He had already worked at the El Salvador mining camp, located in the Atacama Desert of Chile. Those years of heavy work helped him get through the days under the ground of the San Jose mine. The 12th was Edison Fernando Peña. At 34, he had a girlfriend eagerly awaiting his return. Edison entered that mine for love, left everything he had in Santiago, and started working in the mine thanks to his partner, Angelica Alvarez, who was 43 years old. In a letter he sent her through the probe, he wrote, "I feel anxious and have the urge to run. When I want to escape mentally, I swear I imagine us going on trips. I sleep little, almost nothing. I find it hard to fall asleep. I yearn for freedom and long to see the sun." Carlos Barrios was the next to be rescued. He was 27 years old, and he spent his time talking about his son. Unaware his girlfriend was waiting with a surprise. She was pregnant. However, the psychologist treating the miners asked her not to tell the boyfriend the news. The 14th was Victor Zamora. He was the joker of the group. When his mother told him to leave that mine, he would reply, "If that hill sees me and moves aside because of how ugly I am, don't worry." He wrote that he's happy to be in the hole since it means he doesn't have to bathe. He claims this occurred due to his lack of bathing. According to his colleagues, he was the one who lifted their spirits. The next to return to the surface was Victor Segovia. The driller Victor Segovia, 48 years old, wrote everything that happened to him in the shelter from the first day. His intention was to publish a book. Much of his fear inside the mine was due to how everything creaked. The 16th was Daniel Herrera. He was 27 years old and worked as a driver. His mother, Alicia Campos, from the first moment said, "I never felt him dead," and apparently the maternal sense was not confused. The rescue continued with Omar Regadas. He was a father of 5 children, was 56 years old, and loved working in the mine. Despite being trapped underground 3 times in his more than 30 years as a miner. According to his son, he said that a miner always has to work underground. On the other hand, Esteban Rojas worked as an explosives loader. Coincidentally, he was not scheduled to work the day of the collapse. He had gone to make up for 2 days he had missed due to a relative's death. Pablo Rojas Villacorta was one of the toughest men. Pablo Rojas' father had passed away just a week before the collapse. According to his son, he was an oak, bullets didn't affect him. He could have taken 3 or 4 days off for mourning, but he didn't want to take any. Dario Arturo Segovia was the 20th person rescued. He was a 48-year-old man, used to being around a lot of people because he had 13 siblings and 6 children. Dario had been in the mine for 3 months and he was hoping to set up a vegetable business. The day before August 5th, he told his partner that the mine was about to settle and that he wouldn't like to be one of the shift workers when the collapse came. But they offered him overtime and he couldn't say no because of the need. For that day of work, he was going to earn the equivalent of 140 euros. Johnny Barrios followed him and with him a particular story. He was 50 years old and enjoyed his work as a nurse. He was in charge of communicating all the medical analysis reports of his colleagues to the rescue team. Barrios' story became known because of the problems on the surface. He was married to Marta Salinas for 28 years and without getting divorced, he went to live with Susana Valenzuela. The fight between them at the camp over taking charge of Barrios' accounts was shown on several TV programs. Perhaps that's why Barrios came to say, "I'm fine, but get me out of this hole alive or dead." Samuel Abalos was the 22nd. According to his partner, he was 43 and had 3 kids. When he didn't call me, I thought he had returned to his vices because much of his life was surrounded by alcohol and drugs. The 23rd rescue was Carlos Bugueño. He was 27 years old, and in his first letter to his mother, he said, "Rescue my backpack from the locker room, I have money that I collected." He didn't want to lose anything he had earned because he needed it. The countdown of the last days began with Jose Enriquez. He was the spiritual guide. According to one of his daughters, he said that hill was cursed. In the video, his companion Mario Sepulveda, whom we've already talked about, introduced him as Don Jose. The man has high knowledge related to spirituality, which honestly has helped us a lot at this time. The 25th to be rescued was Renan Abalos. He was 29 years old and had only been a miner for 5 months. He was the younger brother of Florencio, the first one to get out. They were from Valparaiso, where he used to go out riding his father's horses. Whenever he had time off, Renan would travel home to enjoy his family, something he took a while to do again, but finally managed. Claudio Acuña followed him. He worked as a driller and had only been in the mine for 3 days. He was excited, but then everything changed. Franklin Lobos was 52 years old and was in charge of driving the trucks. He was known for being a former footballer who played for his national team during the qualifying stage of the Los Angeles Olympics in 1984. He retired in 1996 at 38 years old and went to work in the mine. Richard Villarroel returned to the surface as the 28th rescue. At 26, he was expecting a child. He was one of those who couldn't hold back the tears in the rescue videos. His mother said he was like a child in an adult's body. Juan Carlos Aguilar followed him. He was 49 years old and had spent almost half of his life as a miner. He had several accidents, and that's why he wanted to leave the mine to spend more time with Carla, one of his daughters. The 30th to come out was Raul Bustos. He was 40 years old, had 2 children, and started working as a mechanic in the mine after losing his job following the February 2010 earthquake. Among the last rescued was Pedro Cortés. He was an electrician, and at 26 years old he had several accidents. He lost a finger on his hand at work, so the company promoted him to machine operator to avoid a lawsuit. He was working in that position when the slab of earth fell. Then they brought out Ariel Ticona. He was a heavy machinery operator. He was one of the men who did not want to appear in the first video. He was working to wait in better conditions for his baby girl who was on the way. Ariel asked his partner by letter to name her Hope, the same name as the camp that has been set up at the foot of the mine. The last one rescued was Luis Ursua Irribare. He was 54 years old and had 2 children. He was the leader of the Trapped, as they called themselves. Ursua studied topography. He had been working in the San Jose mine for 2 months, but 31 years as a miner. The psychologist who treated them throughout the rescue said, "The guy must have something extraordinary." And he added, "It must not have been easy to maintain order down there for 17 days. When they had to feed on 2 spoonfuls of tuna every 48 hours. I need to have him well intact until the end." And he more than fulfilled the psychologist's wishes. As they reached the surface, they were attended to by the emergency personnel. The families embraced them as if they had been reborn. They searched for those who had been reborn among the people they hoped to see. Among the people they hoped to see, they sought to greet them, asked them to sign their helmet, which to this day is a symbol of perseverance. They, as a return of favor, gave him a rock. Apparently it is said that within it there is a large amount of gold, but Romagnoli did not think of selling it. After the applause and tears, the problem in the mine raised the voice of many people who pointed against the San Jose Mine Operating Company, and the government President Piñera was pointed out for trying to capitalize on the rescue to gain popularity. The Atacama prosecutor's office opened a criminal investigation in search of those responsible for the tragedy. However, it did not reach the expected result. There were no direct culprits. Once out of the mine, the survivors were invited to television programs in several countries, but after a few months they were only remembered for the anniversary of the tragedy on August 5th of 2010. With such a story behind each miner, the filming of the movie called The 33 was carried out, performed among others by Antonio Banderas and Mario Casas. The film was based on the book In the Darkness. Beyond the good acceptance of the movie, the miners were not satisfied with the result of it, much less with its content. Fun fact, none of them received profits from the book or the movie because they gave up their rights under poor legal advice. Most of the 33 men were able to monetize their experiences through interviews, but over time they were buried in oblivion, waiting for a recognition that never came in the requested manner. They said the state was in debt to them. Do you remember the lawsuit I mentioned to you? Well, before the arrival of coronavirus disease, the miners won a settlement against the Chilean state. They were set to receive around $100,000, but the State Defense Council appealed and the pandemic delayed the legal process. The owners of the San Jose mine didn't pay a penny to the miners because they didn't find enough evidence to sue them for the collapse that affected their lives. They only received psychological attention and an amount less than legally requested. Mario Sepulveda said, "Nothing is going to pay for what we went through, but at this point in life, what I want is tranquility and peace." I know there are colleagues who are having a really hard time right now and who could never work again. Most of the survivors suffer from post-traumatic stress to this day. Many of them have not returned to work out of fear and only receive a minimum pension given by the state. Although they are still alive, part of their past remains buried in the mine that not only took away 69 days of freedom, but a large part of their life. And that's the story for today. I hope you found the case of the 33 miners interesting. Many of you requested it in the comments months ago, so first of all, sorry for the delay, but here is the complete report. I hope you liked how we put it together. For any doubts, questions, or suggestions for future videos, leave them below. If you enjoyed the video, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Check out the linked videos to continue watching. My name is Magno Mephisto, and this was El Dia Que. My first book is now available in physical and ebook formats at all bookstores. Link is in the description.